thank you, and welcome to the top of the world. Christopher Story here for a very special Friday edition. It's 42 minutes after the hour, roughly. Mr. Dan Sullivan, Senator Dan Sullivan, agreed to join me here. And here's a few things we thought we'd tackle in 30 minutes. We're going to solve the world's problems, Senator Sullivan, to talk about, Russian aggression, North Korean aggression, Islamic terrorism, Syrian use of chemical weapons, Iranian nuclear ramp-up, sluggish economic recovery, $20 trillion in debt, and cybersecurity. 30 minutes, we can cover that.
Piece of cake.
Okay, but seriously, I'd love to find out from you when last we spoke here on air together, you were a candidate, Sullivan.
Yeah.
Here you are today at Senator Sullivan.
Yeah, well, it's great to be back and great to be here. You know, I'm on my finishing up our work session, so 2 weeks where we've been out of session in the Senate. Did a week of Marine Corps Reserve training, still doing that, and down at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And then got home and then have been literally all over the state. Was on the slope. Barrow, Dead Horse, Wainwright, Anchorage, Homer for half the day today, then getting up to Kenai and Ilchik. So it's great to be home.
Well, it's good to have you here, and I'm curious, what before we get in, because we do have a lot of topics to cover, of course, but before we do, what's been sort of maybe the biggest surprise, the biggest joy, or unexpected outcome of having been our United States Senator here for Alaska? What's been one of the biggest surprises to you, maybe?
Well, look, I'm first, it's just an honor and privilege to serve. I, feel that every day. And, from my perspective, the biggest surprise is back in D.C., there's, part of a huge part of the job is educating people on Alaska. A huge part of my day-to-day job is educating my colleagues, Democrats, Republicans, the president, the old president, the new president, on how unique we are, what we bring to the table in terms of natural resources, national defense. And to be honest, I guess I've been a little bit surprised by that, but of course, I think we're making progress on that. You may have seen we convinced all our Senate colleagues and one Democrat or someone who serves as a Democrat, Angus King of Maine, to rescind an Obama-era regulation relating to Alaska with the Fish and Wildlife Service on our federal wildlife refuges. That took a lot of work because it just was a reg that only impacted Alaska. The Humane Society ran a multi-million-dollar ad campaign that was very misleading on how, supposedly on how we have unethical hunters here, how we do all these horrible
But they weren't
things.
alone in that. They weren't alone in that. Reading here from Congresswoman Nikki Tongas was saying hunters allowed to shoot bear cubs and wolf pups in their den. This is what we were hearing constantly.
Well, if you watch the floor debate, I was the lead senator on that, and I knew my Senate Democratic colleagues were going to come out and tell all these tall tales that weren't true, and I told them, don't do it. Right. Don't do it, because you don't know what you're talking about, with all due respect. And but we won that, and that was pure. That was only about Alaska. It was a federal reg that we got 52 U.S. senators, even though they were tough votes because they were getting hammered back home on a lot of this misinformation. But we're doing the same with the military, right? Making the case of how critically important the state of Alaska is to our nation's defense in so many different areas: missile defense. Having these incredible air combat fighters and air combat power up here. Great troops that we've been fighting to keep here, like the 425, the brigade combat team that President Obama wanted to get rid of. We halted that, convinced a lot of people, including the Army, that this was a strategic mistake as the Russians built up. So, but to me, I think that's in some ways the biggest surprise, because constantly having to make the case, hey, we're unique. We bring so much to the country in terms of our strategic location, in terms of our resources. But as you know, there's certain groups out there that want to make us a national park and lock us up, and we got to push back against that constantly.
And then I think that really speaks to you're discussing the idea that you're out there educating people about Alaska, your colleagues and otherwise, and we appreciate that. Let's talk about energy independence. Let's talk about the important role that Alaska plays in that Are you finding a different conversation taking place in a Trump-era administration?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What's it sounding like?
It's been, to me, probably the best thing that's happened. Certainly the best thing that's happened. I had over an hour-long meeting, Senator Murkowski and I did with President Trump in the Oval Office, and literally we came with maps, with PowerPoints, with just explaining to him, particularly on the economy. Did note with him, hey, we got an economy that's struggling, but it shouldn't be struggling. It's struggling in many ways because we had a federal government, particularly in the Obama administration, that wanted to shut us down. And we walked through them. Hey, where they locked up the NPRA, where they locked up the offshore. And he was in that meeting with the Secretary of Interior, Ryan Zinke, great guy. He's going to be great for Alaska, Navy SEAL, combat vet. And the president was like, where can we help? How can we help? I want to produce energy in Alaska. It was a great meeting. So we have a completely different executive branch that wants to be a partner in opportunity, not an obstacle to not only our economy, but achieving, energy independence, which we can be a big part of. So sea change, and probably the most exciting element, and also someone who, and this has been a big focus of mine in the Senate, someone who wants to roll back unnecessary regulations that are choking off private sector opportunities. And, we've been ground zero for a lot of those over-regulations in Alaska. And that Fish and Wildlife Service one was an example, but the president's focused on trying to roll back a lot of those through his own executive orders. So stand by. I think we'll be seeing more of that action in Alaska soon.
All right. I like that. Thank you. A lot of the things that were discussed, we're still discussing from 2014 to today, and that would be, we can touch on either one, maybe all of these. Veterans, are the veterans being better taken care of today than when you got there? What's changing, and what can we expect to see change for the care of our vets?
Well, I serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and I serve on the Armed Services Committee, so I'm still serving in the reserve. So I feel I got a pretty good handle on that, particularly kind of the active duty guys that you have oversight of on the Armed Services Committee, then when they come veterans. I do think there's progress, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet at all. In 2014, you might remember, Chris, this Choice Act was passed. I wasn't in the Senate then, but then the implementation of the Choice Act, particularly in Alaska, was an utter disaster, failure. And everybody knew that. Nobody said, "Oh no, it's going great up in Alaska." It was a disaster. So you might remember there was an undersecretary, the number 3 guy in the VA under President Obama. His name was Dr. Shulkin. He was up for his confirmation. I put a hold on his confirmation, even though he was very qualified. And I said, "Look, I'll lift my hold if you commit to come up to Alaska with me. I'll take you all over, including I took him to the Kenai Peninsula. We had a big town hall meeting with all of our veterans. And you come up with a plan to fix the problems in the choice implementation in Alaska, because you're going to see it's a disaster." And he committed to me to do that. So I lifted my hold, brought him up here. He was here for a week. We held a hearing, Veterans Affairs hearing. We held a community veterans meeting in Fairbanks. We held one down here in the Kenai, and they started implementing some things. We're not there yet, but here's the good news in my view. President Trump then nominated Dr. Shulkin to be the secretary of the VA. So again, during his hearing, I got a commitment for him to come back to Alaska now as a secretary.
Right.
But here's a guy who, he knows a lot about Alaska. He's been up here. He's met with our vets. He's seen the anger that people have. He knows exactly what the specific issues are. So I think that's good news for our veterans. I'm going to be meeting with some veterans in the Nilchik today at the VFW, something I always try to do when I'm in any community. So I think we're making progress, but we're not there yet. But we do have a guy in the now who's the head of the VA who knows Alaska pretty darn well.
Let's talk about Obamacare. That was a hot topic before, is still now. We have a Republican House, Senate, and administration in the White House. It would seem to me we're unstoppable relative to repealing. In fact, I got a text message from a veteran in Kodiak just this morning who Ken wanted to know what's happening. How are we going to repeal Obamacare? Is it in progress? Do you think that we've got a chance at it? I personally, Dan, wrote a check, and it was called for a shared responsibility payment. I felt like I was right into the People's Republic of America. I didn't like it. What are we doing about that? Where's it going?
You probably watched that we took up, well, the House did, the initial repeal and replace attempt through what's called budget reconciliation. And that did not pass. Well, they never even took a vote on it. They had to pull because they didn't have, in the House, they did not have the votes. My view clearly is that Obamacare, whether in Alaska or nationwide, has done more harm than good. There's this talk about there has been the expansion of coverage. But as you're kind of indicating, if your coverage means that you're paying, and I get these emails and letters all the time from Alaskans, if your premiums have tripled and you're maybe a family of two with a husband and wife and they're paying $1,500, $1,600 in terms of premiums and have a $10,000 deductible, well, that's not really coverage if you can't afford it.
Right.
I mean, if you have to pay $30,000 out of pocket before you get anything, and we have the highest costs in the country in terms of premiums, but when Obamacare was enacted, we had in the individual market 5 insurers. We're down to 1, and that one's hanging by a thread. Even Governor Walker's head of the insurance, director of insurance under the Department of Commerce, has testified in front of the Senate that the market in Alaska is in chaos. So we have to do something. I thought the House bill had some elements that a lot of people liked. I've gone around the state, teletown halls, meetings all over with different stakeholders. Some of the top things: get rid of the individual mandate, get rid of the employer mandate, get rid of the Cadillac tax. The House bill had all of that in it. The challenge and one of the concerns I had with the House bill in its present form is that, particularly with regard to the individual market, the amount that Alaskans would have to pay even more, even though we already pay the highest premiums in the country by far, would have actually likely gone up. So we were working really hard when that bill came over to our side to work on some tweaks, not a big attack on the structural aspects of it, to fix some of the things that we thought were going to be necessarily difficult for Alaska given our structural problems and high costs. Like I said, it never got over here, but we're still working with the Secretary of HHS, supporting Alaska's applied for what's called a 1332 waiver to give them more flexibility. So I'm going to continue to focus on it. I made a campaign commitment to repeal and replace. I'm still committed to that. But we'll see what the House does, right? Because it's going to start over there.
Right. And there's got to be, though, some sense of hope, be it Obamacare, be it the VA, be it the economy. There has to be some sense of optimism from you that you now have, even you get a bunch of Republicans in a room, it's still like herding cats.
Yeah, it is.
But you've got to feel a wind of opportunity here.
Well, look, Chris, you touched on the issue that I think is the most important issue, which is and I remind everybody in my caucus, my first 2 years in the Senate, I was talking about this all the time with my colleagues, on the Senate floor with the Trump administration. We have to grow our economy. The Obama years and even towards the end of the George W. Bush years, we have gone almost 15 years in the United States of America without growing at a 3% growth clip, a 3% GDP growth. That's actually average. That's not even that great. 3%. The average for America is almost 4% GDP growth. President Obama was the first president in the history of the country who never in 1 year hit even 3%. Never hit it. And so to me, energy, opportunities, regulatory reform, tax reform, infrastructure, these are all elements where I think we can start growing the economy again. But the president and his team, they got to to focus on it, because to me it's the number one thing. And of course, our economy here is very, very sluggish. We got the budget challenges down in Juneau. But as a nation, we have to get back to traditional levels of economic growth, because a good job is the best social program. A strong economy is what's going to really enable us to take care of this monstrosity of a national debt, which doubled under President Obama from $10 trillion to $20 trillion. It's all about growth, and we got to get back to it. We have the opportunity to do it, particularly on things like energy, if we unleash the energy potential of Alaska and America. So that's going to be my continued focus in the Senate.
How do you have the conversation with people? Because we out here, your constituents, we're having this conversation with folks that rolling back or deregulating to a certain extent, lessening regulatory responsibilities and things that we consider to be over-regulation isn't necessarily equivalent to and commensurate with destroying the ecosystem and destroying our environment. What's that conversation like as you talk about that? Yeah. That does increase our economy, increase our economic opportunities to repeal and roll back certain things that are unnecessary regulatory requirements. How do you have the conversation with somebody who's well-intentioned and concerned about the environment, but yet they also want a good economy?
Yeah. Well, look, it's a great question, because whenever you say, hey, I want to roll back regs, or I want to, you get kind of painted with the, then you don't care about the environment. Exactly. That's not true. You can do both. You can responsibly develop your resources and protect the environment. But let me give you some examples that I think we're going to have an opportunity. When I go back to D.C., in the next few days, we're going to be introducing in the next couple weeks this bill that I've been working on for months. It's called the Rebuild America Now Act. The Rebuild America Now Act. So the president's talking about this big idea of big infrastructure, which of course I think we would welcome in Alaska, right? We're a resource-rich, infrastructure-poor state. But here's the problem. You look at laws like NEPA, the National Environment Policy Act, which is very well-intentioned. It's been abused by groups that, in my view, don't want to move forward on the economy. So right now, on average, when you look at permitting a road or permitting a bridge, simple things that everybody agrees we need to do, it now takes years. Years. We had a hearing on airport infrastructure in the Commerce Committee. The head of the Seattle SeaTac Airport testified about their new runway. They built a new runway down at SeaTac. Took them 4 years to build it. Seemed pretty long, but I guess it was a complicated project. And then I asked him, how long did it take you to get the federal permits to pre-build that? And he goes, 15 years.
Wow.
15 years.
Unbelievable.
You remember Shell had one exploration well. They wanted to drill off the coast of Alaska. It took 7 years, $7 billion to permit that well. The Kensington mine, which I was involved at when I was Attorney General towards the end, when we had litigation, if you remember, went all the way to the Supreme Court outside of Juneau. If you include the litigation, it took almost 20 years to permit that mine that now employs close to 400 people with great wages. So I don't think anyone thinks that 6 years to permit a bridge, 15 years to permit an airport runway, 20 years to permit a mine is good for the country. And we need, particularly when you look at our international competitors like China, I mean, they're building things. Now, we don't look, I'm not advocating we go that far, right? Because they trash their environment. Yeah. So do the Russians. But we need to start getting smart on these things, where the average environmental impact statement used to be about 200-300 pages. Now these run in the thousands and thousands of pages. Nobody reads them. The reason there's so many, they're so long, and they take so long is because people sue on them. Mm-hmm. They cost millions of dollars to produce. It's a system that's completely dysfunctional, and it hurts us probably more than any other state. So my bill is a very broad-based bill to try to address that for pipelines, for roads, for bridges, for any infrastructure. And I've talked to the president about it. I've talked to a bunch of Democratic senators about it. We're hopeful that it's going to make some progress.
That was Senator Sullivan knocking on wood. You are listening to a very special edition of On Top of the World Radio here on Friday with me, Chris Story, and Senator Dan Sullivan. And you mentioned, Senator, that you'd want the president to focus on the economy. You said that he and his team need to focus on the economy. Your Rebuild America Now Act hopefully will help spur that along. But I got to tell you, he's got a lot, as do you, sir, as a senator. You've got a lot on your table. Let's talk just a little bit about North Korea before we move on to the Russia. Let's talk about North Korea. Should we be sleeping tonight, when we go to bed tonight, we read books to our children, and we ourselves fall off to sleep, should we feel secure? Are we secure? What's going on?
Well, look, it's a great question. I do think that one thing where I've complimented the president on in particular is his national security team. All right, he has put together General Mattis, the Marine 4-star, who's now the Secretary of Defense, H.R. McMaster, who's his new national security advisor. I happen to have served under him, even though he's a Army general. I'd served under him at a previous time. He's put together a very good team, and I think that should comfort everybody, Democrat, Republican, because as you're mentioning, it is a very dangerous world right now. Here's my biggest concern about North Korea, and this is all public, so I'm not saying anything that's come out in classified hearings, but it's not if, it's when Kim Jong-un or whoever is replacing that crazy guy is going to be able to hit the continental United States with an intercontinental ballistic nuclear missile. It's going to happen one of these days. One of these days. And we need to do much more, from my perspective, on missile defense. America's missile defense is actually based in our great state. The radar systems, the missiles that would shoot down a rogue missile coming over from North Korea, it's all based here. We are starting finally to build it up. I think we need to do much more, and we're going to be introducing legislation on that. But to me, in addition to some of the sanctions and getting our allies and others like China to do much more with regard to pressuring North Korea, we got to take care of our own country in the event that that crazy guy tries to launch one of these. So I think one of the things that we have to do is much more missile defense. We're starting to build it up. Again, it's all based here, right? 300 National Guards, men and women in Alaska protect the entire nation. Alaskans can have a lot of pride in that. But from my perspective, we have to do much more. If he launches one or two missiles and then, year, 2, 3, 4 years out, we need to be able to tell the American people, hey, we got your back. We got a 99% chance to shoot that down. And then we should also tell them, if you try and do that, we'll shoot it down and we will massively retaliate against you. And even a crazy man probably will be deterred by that.
One of the things that I recall about your candidacy, and one of the things that I find admirable about you, is that you are a soldier. You are still committed to the military yourself. You feel that we are with President Trump and the support he's getting from the Senate and the House. You feel that he is capable of making the decisions, the tough decisions, and you feel confident in the team around him and him in strategizing a military defense.
I do, and I feel strongly that they're committed to rebuilding our military. If you look at the Obama years, cut military spending by almost 25%, cut the Army in an incredible, when they try to get rid of that 425, the 5,000-man brigade combat team, I fought that tooth and nail for over a year and a half, put holds on generals and secretaries of the Army. But they cut 40,000 troops out of the Army just during that time. The only guys that they didn't cut were our guys, and that's because we were fighting it. But no, they want to rebuild the military, which I think I fully support. And, the president's picked some very, very sharp senior advisors and cabinet officials on military matters. And the current leadership running the Army, running the Navy, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dunford, who's a Marine, it's, I think, some of the finest officers we have in the country. So I'm confident we have great leadership in the military and the Secretary of Defense, and I think the president's listening to them. But we got a lot of challenges out there, Chris. There's no doubt about it.
I'm not as, what do I know? I read the news, I watch, I look at the internet. I'm not so worried about the Russians flying up the coast of Alaska relative to, I believe it's Putin chest pounding just a little bit in retaliation to maybe what's happening in Syria and pushing back against
I would agree
President
with that.
Trump. You think that's accurate?
I think that's accurate.
Okay.
And I think Putin is clearly somebody who responds to force. Mm-hmm. And I think during the Obama years, we ceded the field in the Middle East. I mean, look what the Russians did. They saw the U.S. withdrawing. They saw us kind of being friendly to Iran, which is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, and the Russians moved in a huge way. I think what we now need to start doing, and it's not easy to do, is reestablishing American credibility throughout the world, whether it's in the Asia Pacific or Middle East. But I think Putin responds to force, and rebuilding our military in that regard is going to be important.
I noticed online that you and your daughter were up skiing at Alyeska, something my daughter and I like to do. I think that
it was great.
I'm glad you had a little bit of an opportunity to relax.
I had a little bit of time. I miss my girls. So, my wife and family are in Anchorage, so I'm solo out in D.C., so I just work my staff to death and try to get home as often as possible.
Senator Dan Sullivan, thank you. It's been an honor and privilege to have you here on Top of the World, and thank you for what you're doing in D.C.
Yes,
for
sir,
the
Chris,
world.
And you too. Thanks for your public service here with the show, and I look forward to getting back on.
All right, yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you for joining me. It's been Chris Story along with Senator Dan Sullivan. You'll find this interview on topoftheworldradio.com, on topoftheworldradio.com, and in Homer, Dan Sullivan for the day. Find him, catch him, and say thank you. Take care.